There are encounters that happen without warning, without logic, without explanation. You are in the right place at the right time, and suddenly someone enters your life as if they had always been there. There is no way to predict, there is no way to plan. But when it happens, you feel it. It feels as if something bigger is moving the pieces on the board, as if the entire universe is conspiring for that moment. Many call this a coincidence, others prefer to call it luck. But what if, in fact, these encounters are God's answers to something that was already written long before you imagined? How many times have you felt like you've known someone for a long time, even though you've just met them? How many stories have you heard about people who lost each other, only to find each other years later, at just the right moment? This doesn't happen by chance. A man's steps are directed by the Lord. How then shall a man understand his way? Proverbs 20:24. Fate is not a blind force. It is a carefully designed divine plan. There are encounters that cannot be avoided. There are souls that were made to cross paths, and there are stories that were already written before the first glance. Maybe you've already experienced this. Maybe I'm living now. Or maybe you haven't noticed the signs that God is preparing something for you. Today you will learn about real stories that prove that certain souls always find themselves again because they were already united long before this world existed. And more than that, you will learn to recognize the signs that the universe places on your path to guide you to what is already yours. Now tell me, could it be that the encounter that changed his life was really the work of chance? Or had God already written this story before you were even born? There are stories that defy logic, encounters that seem written long before they happen. Time passes, paths separate, but in some inexplicable way, what was determined meets again, as if an invisible force sewed together the threads of life, aligning every detail until everything fell into place at the exact moment. Claire never imagined that a forgotten watch could become the key to a reunion that time tried to erase. Decades earlier, as a young man, he met Antoine at a festival in the south of France. It was 3 days that seemed like an eternity, as if they had lived an entire life within that short space of time. On the last night, sitting by the river, Antoine took an old watch out of his pocket and handed it to Claire with a mysterious smile. "Time willing, it will bring us back." The promise remained in the air, but life continued its course. Antoine moved to London, Claire remained in France. The watch was forgotten in a drawer, and that memory became just a distant nostalgia. Years passed. Claire's hair turned grey, the marks of time appeared on her face, and the memories of that summer seemed to belong to another life. But one day, while walking aimlessly through the streets of Paris, he decided to enter an antique store. Among piles of forgotten objects, something caught his attention. A watch. An old model, identical to the one Antoine had given him so many years before. When he took it in his hands, he felt a shiver run through his body. The second hand was stuck. Time had stopped. And the most impressive thing, he had stopped at exactly the same time that Antoine gave him that gift. His heart raced. She asked the seller where that watch came from, and the answer took her breath away. It was sold this morning by a man who collects antiques. His name was Antoine. Destiny had arranged a meeting, and Claire couldn't ignore the call. The next day, when he entered a cafe on the banks of the River Seine, he saw a white-haired man sitting alone. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the 40 years that separated them disappeared. The clock had stopped, but time had not erased what God had already written. Just as Claire threw a watch that carried a reunion into oblivion, Isabella threw a prayer into the sea. She was just a teenager when, on a lonely night on the coast of Portugal, she wrote a letter to God. He asked for a sign. She asked to find the one who had been chosen for her even before her birth. The letter was placed inside a bottle and thrown into the water. The next day, his family returned to Brazil, and the memory of that prayer was carried away with the tides. 20 years later, Miguel, a Portuguese fisherman, found a bottle floating in the ocean. When he opened it, he saw the ink was already worn away by time, but he was still able to read the words written by Isabella so many years before. Something inside him was uneasy. He didn't know who that woman was, nor why that letter had come to him, but he felt he needed to keep it. Time passed, and life took its course. In 2015, without really understanding why, Miguel decided to travel to Brazil. One night he walked into a bookstore and met a woman who looked strangely familiar. The conversation flowed naturally, as if they had known each other for years. After a few meetings, Miguel mentioned that he believed that God united souls through time. Isabella smiled and, without knowing the impact her words would have, said that when she was young, she wrote a letter and threw it into the sea, asking to find her destiny. Silence took over the environment. The next day, Miguel went to his suitcase, took out the letter he had kept for so many years, and gave it to Isabella. It was the same one she wrote 2 decades earlier. The sea has not forgotten. Time has not erased. God heard. There are encounters that are only fleeting, but there are those that echo through time. Since childhood, Amélie and Jean were inseparable. They grew up together on the streets of Lyon, promising never to leave each other. But fate took them on opposite paths. Jean's family moved to Canada, and the two lost contact. Life passed, Amélie got married, had children, followed its course, but something inside her never forgot that name. At night, I dreamed about him. He didn't see a face, he didn't relive memories, he just saw the name Jean being written over and over again, as if time was trying to tell him something. Until one day, in one of those dreams, he heard a voice whisper, "When you hear this name again, you will know that you have never been forgotten." He woke up with his heart racing. The next day, he went out to walk aimlessly, as if his soul knew something was about to happen. And then, in the middle of the crowd, he heard a young man call someone. "Jean, wait!" His body froze. The name that echoed in his dreams now echoed in the street. He turned slowly and saw a man with white hair. The moment their eyes met, time stopped. It wasn't a coincidence. Fate had waited decades, but had never given up. Stories like these are not just coincidences. They show us that when something needs to happen, it doesn't matter the time, distance, or circumstances. If God wrote an encounter, it will be fulfilled at the exact moment. Time may seem like an enemy, but it is actually a great ally. It shapes, prepares, strengthens. Because a love that arrives prematurely can be wasted, but a love that arrives at the right time remains forever. Perhaps, as you listen to this story, something inside you is wondering, have I ever experienced a predestined encounter and didn't realize it? Does God already have something written for me, and I haven't seen the signs yet? Perhaps the signs are already around you. Maybe the universe is already trying to show you something, and the question remains, are you ready to see? Time and chance may seem like uncontrolled forces, but when we look back and connect the dots, we realize that nothing was truly random. Small details, seemingly insignificant decisions, unexpected changes in plans, everything leads us to something bigger. God gives us signs all the time, like clues scattered along the way, but we are often too busy to notice them. Predestined encounters do not come with clear warnings. They are not accompanied by a sign saying, "This person was sent to you." They arrive silently, disguised as coincidences, hidden in moments that at first glance seem ordinary. But when we look carefully, we realize that there are patterns, there is something that repeats itself, there is a call that insists. Man's steps are directed by the Lord. How can anyone discern his own path? Proverbs 20:24. If there is something God wants to reveal, he doesn't just say it once, he repeats, he insists. He puts signs in places where you can't ignore them. One of these signs is the inexplicable connection. Sometimes when meeting someone, the feeling is not that it is a beginning, but a reunion, as if the soul recognized it even before the mind understood it. There is no effort to create rapport, no need for long explanations. It's like a book that has already been read before, a song whose melody already belongs to us. It's not just about liking someone, being enchanted by someone. It's something deeper. It's like when you walk down an unfamiliar road, but suddenly you feel like you've been there before. The heart understands before reason. There are also the chances that are not accidents. Have you ever found yourself crossing someone's path again and again at unexpected times? Have you ever been to places you never go, only to meet a person who made an impact on your life? Sometimes the most important encounters happen because a sequence of small decisions led us exactly to where we were supposed to be. Think about the times you changed your mind at the last minute, and without knowing it, that change of plans put you in front of someone who changed the course of your story. This doesn't just happen by chance. The steps of a good man are established by the Lord, and he delights in his way. Psalms 37:23. And there are those signs that appear even before the meeting. Dreams, subtle messages, strange repetitions. Some people report dreaming about someone they don't know and, years later, meeting exactly that person in real life. Others see the same name repeatedly, hear about someone before they even meet them, notice patterns that seem to guide them toward a specific connection. This is because God often warns before carrying out the task. It plants seeds in the unconscious, as if to say, "Get ready. Something is coming. And it shall come to pass before they cry that I will answer. They will still be speaking, and I will hear them." Isaiah 65:24. But perhaps the strongest sign of an encounter written by God is the inexplicable peace it brings. This peace does not mean the absence of challenges, but rather the certainty that, regardless of what happens, that connection has a greater purpose. When God unites paths, he does not bring confusion, does not cause doubt, does not generate fear. What comes from him brings calm. Even if life tries to separate you, even if time seems like an enemy, deep down, you feel that that connection wasn't a mistake. The question is, how many times do we ignore these signs because we expect something grand, when in fact God works in subtlety? How many times do we dismiss something because we think that if it were truly from God, it would come in an obvious and spectacular way? God speaks, it shows. But it's up to us. Open your eyes to see. Maybe now you're wondering, if there are signs, if there are predestined meetings, why does it sometimes seem like nothing happens? Why do some people wait so long for this meeting and it never arrives? The answer may be where we least imagine it. The wait can be agonizing. When we want something, we want it now. The human heart does not like uncertainty. It does not deal well with the idea that something important may take a while to happen. But if there is one truth about encounters written by God, it is this: they happen at the right time, neither before nor after. Life teaches us to run, but God teaches us to wait. There is a divine rhythm to everything, a symphony that follows an exact beat. The problem is that we want to advance the notes, we want to skip parts of the melody. But have you ever tried to force a flower to bloom prematurely? If you pull your petals too soon, you don't speed up the process. You just destroy what should bloom naturally. Everything has its time, and there is a time for every purpose under heaven. Ecclesiastes 3:1. Time is not an obstacle, it is a preparer. What seems like a delay is, in fact, an invisible work of God shaping not only the meeting, but the people who are part of it. He does not join paths before both are ready. Love that comes too soon can be wasted. Love that arrives at the right time remains. How many relationships were lost because they came before maturity? How many stories could have been eternal, but were broken because hearts were not yet ready to receive them? God does not advance blessings. He prepares first, delivers later. But there is something even deeper in this waiting. God's timing is not always just about you. Sometimes the delay isn't because you're not ready, but because the other person is still being worked on. The plans of the Lord remain forever, the purposes of His heart throughout all generations. Psalms 33:11. Think about it. What if God was protecting you? What if He was preventing you from entering an unfinished story? That was part of something that still needed to be healed before receiving you. How many times do we see time as a delay, when in fact it is a shield? What is true is not lost. What belongs to your destiny will not be handed over to someone else. But while you wait, what are you doing with that time? Many people wait for a date as if they were standing at a station, just looking at the tracks, waiting for a train to appear. But waiting is not passive. It is a period of construction. Be still and know that I am God. Psalms 46:10. Instead of asking, why hasn't it happened yet? Logically ask, what can I learn in the meantime? God does not make us wait to punish us, but to teach us. Waiting is a time of growth, of strengthening, of preparation. It's not a punishment, it's a process. If the meeting hasn't happened yet, trust. Doesn't mean He won't come. It means that when it comes, it will be at the exact moment when nothing can destroy it. But what about when this meeting finally happens? How do you know if the time has come? How can we be sure that what we waited for so long really came from God? Perhaps the answer is closer than we imagine.